All right. Well, we have made it through another week. So, welcome back to another future focused weekly update where my goal is to keep you 10 steps ahead of what's happening at the intersection of business technology and the human experience. I have double and triple checked my mic settings and everything like that. So, at least to my knowledge, everything should be coming through on the first round, which is a highlight after a couple of weeks of technical snafus. So, for those of you who watch and listen to this, thank you for tuning in. Be sure, if you get value from this, to share it with someone. If you watch and listen to this and you find value, I would greatly appreciate a review or a rating just to help others find it. Always helps me continue to grow what I'm trying to accomplish here. So, with that, I'm going to do my usual rundown of some of the things. I've got some big heavy ones that I want to get into right out of the gate. So I'm going to just jump straight to it. This one came across my radar last night, and I'm just going to say this one, I had a whole bundle of mixed emotions when this one came through. I was heartbroken. I was concerned. I'm also angry about this one. And so what this one is I saw last night that OpenAI is exploring the use of its generative AI technology for the generation of not safe for work, or in other words, adult content. And so a couple elephants in the room I just want to address first. For those of you who listen and follow me on this, I just want to be crystal clear that, some might think that, well, you're just upset about this because you're coming from a biblical worldview. And so, my reaction to this is, well, the Bible says this. And let me just tell you, while that absolutely is impacting and influencing why it has upset me so much, I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't. But it's far more complex than that. And I think my goal in this is to make the case that this is serious. And this is something we all need to be taking seriously and not just go, oh, that's just a prude way of thinking about things. Because this is a serious, serious risk. Something else I want to be really clear on is that I don't want anything I say in this to come across as though I'm angry at or hateful towards anybody who's involved in this industry or involved in this. I have known and still know many people who have gotten wrapped up in this, and they are often tragic, complicated stories. And so anyway, anything that comes out in intensity or frustration or anger with what's going on here is not directed at the people so much as where we're going with some of this stuff. And one of the things that is, I just really want to lay out the case for this, because as I read the article and as I was digging into it, what OpenAI right now is exploring is there responsible use of their technology in adult content, which I also found a little ironic, just coming off the heels of them terminating a number of employees for using their technology for not safe for work content. And so here they are now going, well, actually, we're going to lean in and explore this. But this is really concerning. And like I said, I don't want people to interpret my reason for being so up in arms about this as, well, it's just because of your worldview. I'm really concerned because, you know what? I know lots of people who do not share my worldview on this that agree with me firmly that there is no responsible use of this. And there is countless data out there demonstrating that adult media is not a net positive. It's not a net neutral. And anybody who's listened to me for any length of time knows I typically almost always come into things going, well, it's more complicated, it's more nuanced, things like this. This is a topic where I will double down on. This is not benefiting anyone for us to start digging into how can AI accelerate and amplify adult content. There is nothing beneficial about objectifying people. It degrades intimacy and relationships. It is highly, highly addictive. And I think when we really assess this, we can pretty clearly see that this is like arguing for smoking. There's just not a net benefit. Now, to also be clear, I'm not coming at this from a place of self-righteousness. I can tell you firsthand, this got a hold of me when I was young. I struggled with it for quite some time before I got help, and by the grace of God, got out of it. But I'm telling you right now, this is dangerous, dangerous stuff. Now, I will be the first to say I was not surprised that it was going this way. If you listen to some of my stuff in the past, I'm going to be on some future podcasts where I'm going to talk about this in even greater detail. It is not surprising that AI technology would start to go down the path of adult media. I was really disappointed that such a significant player was already going down this path. And for people who may push back on this and go, well, if OpenAI didn't do it, wouldn't just someone else go along with this? And perhaps, but this whole attitude of, well, it just kind of is a thing and we just kind of have to accept it. When we really see the destruction that this has on society and human beings, this is not something to tread lightly with or go, well, if they don't do it, someone else will. And the reality is, I don't think we realize how significant it is for one of the big players to get involved, because while some might say, oh, well, someone else would just come up with their own AI model to push this forward. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how much time, energy, money, and innovation goes into building these models. It would be the equivalent of when the internet came out, if every web hosting platform had said, we do not allow adult content on our web hosting services. And then all of a sudden, Amazon Web Services suddenly came out and said, well, I guess we will. The floodgates it opens because the root technology that is capable of doing all this now suddenly opens up all these different apps and things like that. Another company in the adult industry couldn't just easily stand up its own powerhouse like OpenAI. So it moving in this, I knew we were going to move into the age of AI generated adult content and have been concerned about that for some time. The fact OpenAI is actively pursuing it and going, well, maybe we can see if there's some inherent value to this, or maybe there's a way we can spin this to be positive. Again, I am really, really disappointed that we are already at this stage, and I'm very concerned about where this is going to go. And I'm going to get into two things. One, why is this such a risk that AI is getting involved? Because again, believe me, I've been on the other side arguing the other, justifying it, excusing it, things. I've been there. So this isn't me sitting over here going, pointing fingers. This is me going, I've seen firsthand how destructive this can be. I've read the data. I have friends and know people who's had their lives destroyed by this. This is a cancer that we're talking about. And I think the thing that concerns me most about AI getting involved is, and I'm going to address one of the ones that I've heard in conversations with this, where I've had pushback and excuses, where people go, well, but the adult film industry, there's a lot of exploitation and things like this. Isn't it a net positive that we would have AI involved so that people don't have to be involved in doing this? And I've been in debates where that has been raised as a potential net benefit to AI being involved. But making that argument demonstrates you don't fundamentally understand what goes into this kind of stuff. AI, and I'm talking about the AI, because if anything, AI being involved in this may actually lead to more people being exploited by the industry and by this content, not less. Because again, perfecting these models is highly, highly human intensive. There are still people who are suffering from having to train the models that we have today, having to be shown and have to go through really, really terrible, traumatic content to have to filter through it. Because think about it, these models were trained not to go into certain things. In an open-ended model that's designed to go as wide as the ocean is deep, how do you think that technology was trained? Hey, but don't cross this line. Someone somewhere had to see that stuff and go, no, that's got to go. So when you think about it that way, now you're going to train highly specialized models to create toxic content, toxic media. You're going to now have to bring more people in to say, well, how do we train them out? Well, somebody's got to sit and watch all this stuff and review it and say, when is this a good example and a bad example? And so it actually may require even more people involved in the process than there were before, and a new demographic of people who are now having to be involved in this, who maybe previously you didn't need to hire for these certain roles. Now this new group of people, this new audience of people are going to have to be brought in to train these models on this specialty use case. So the argument that, well, maybe we can reduce how many people get exploited by this, that's actually a false pretense. You can't assume that, well, because the output may not have humans in it, then the way we get to that point will have less humans. In fact, it might be more. And that is extremely concerning. I think the other thing that's concerning, because again, some of the other pushback I've gotten to this is, well, it's already out there, it's already happening. Isn't it just natural progression for AI to do it? I'm I've known that that was probably the path we were going to take with it. But this is one of those areas where I go, I understand that more when you go, well, there's pros and cons, and it's a complicated, nuanced situation. With something like this, where we go, there's not a net benefit. Nobody goes, you know what really improved my life? Adult content. It doesn't happen. And any perceived improvements or benefits or pleasures that come from this are short lived, and the consequences always outweigh any temporary benefits or satisfaction that comes from it. So saying, well, it was going to happen, so just let things lie, I would say I firmly disagree with that in this arena specifically. And I think another big concern with this is we've already seen how AI pushes the limits to speed and volume. So there's already countless piles of data showing the negative effect the rapid expansion of adult entertainment has had on society, with which the internet really hyper exposed, right? It just hyper accelerated this. Now we're talking about taking that to a whole new level of volume and speed, which on something that already is toxic, this is serious. This is serious. I think something else is, because we're now, if you've listened to my stuff in the past, you know where I stand on anything that's dehumanizing to someone. AI being involved in adult media only further dehumanizes humans. Now, you may say, how is it dehumanizing? Because isn't it creating completely artificially generated people? Yes, but you're creating artificially generated people that are in the shape, form, image of people to be completely objectified, which is then going to push the line further of, well, it's not really a person. So suddenly the restrictions that we've historically had, which obviously they've been eroding, in my opinion, for quite some time, but these are going to erode even further when we start going, well, now it's not really even a person anymore. It's an AI non-person, thing. It's just make believe. All of a sudden, things that we've historically even used as some of these safeguards, like age limits or how far is too far with this stuff, suddenly those lines become a lot blurrier because people start to go, well, but I mean, nobody's getting hurt, right? Well, actually, they are, for reasons I've described before, because of the outcomes and also the people involved in this. But again, it's just going to continue to push the line with this. I think, furthermore, two of the biggest things that, well, honestly, this whole thing has me very concerned and upset. But I think one of the other ones is, as we think about this, much of adult media today is passive consumption. Now, granted, there's always been the, interactive, personalized stuff, but what this is going to do is this is going to accelerate that personalization layer. Maybe not initially, but what will happen is we will get to a point, like with everything else we're seeing with AI. Why should I have to engage with a static thing that was pre-created when I can interact with something that's created in real time based on exactly what I want, what I'm looking for, what I'm looking to get out of this? That now makes what was already a highly dangerous toxic substance even more addictive and destructive. And I've had multiple people reach out to try and be on the show, who are creating, their own tools like AI girlfriends or AI, things like this. And I've pushed back and said, believe me, if you come on the show, it's not going to be me supporting what you're doing and advocating for it. If anything, it's going to be a straight up debate why what you're doing, I think, is destructive to society as a whole. And of course, then let's just say the request to be on the show quickly disappears. But I think this drive, this move towards greater personalization, especially in this area, is highly dangerous. It's not even like, well, aren't there some positive benefits to this? And believe me, I have heard all the justifications, the excuses for why, well, couldn't this help with this or might. And you know what? Like I said before, I, at some point in my life, have been that person who probably would have made those same things. So this isn't me trying to condemn or point fingers at people. This is me trying to drive greater awareness to how serious of a risk this is and why we shouldn't just go, well, I guess this is where we're going. I think the other thing, in addition to how the next natural step for this is personalization, is that next step for personalization is only further laying the groundwork and grooming a generation of people to believe they can have intimacy with AI, which opens up a whole new Pandora's box of risks and consequences that, quite frankly, I don't know that we're ready to handle the fallout of where this goes, to be completely honest. And so there are serious, serious risks to what we already have today. So, I mean, hopefully by this point, my case that, hey, we should be taking this seriously anyway and not just going, well, people kind of do what they got to do. We should be taking this much more serious today as it is. We should be far more concerned about this as we think about AI's involvement and what AI can do to accelerate, exacerbate, and just take to the next level something that we already don't have a handle on, that is already just wreaking havoc in society as a whole. Now, I don't just share this one to get everybody amped up or concerned or what, even if it makes you mad, fine, reach out to me. We can have an offline conversation on this. I am happy to dig into it at whatever length. But I think it can often feel helpless to go, yeah, but what do we do about this? One of the biggest AI players now is potentially getting into this space, exploring the possibilities of it. Once that floodgate opens, it's going to open up a whole nother, that can feel very helpless. And I don't want people leaving this going, thanks a lot, Christopher, for scaring the snot out of us about what this might mean and feeling completely helpless to this, because there are things we all can do. And quite frankly, regardless of who you are or where you are or what you're involved with, you should be doing whatever you can to help push back the tides in this and help push back this one. So for this, first of all, one, if you listen to this and you're someone who goes, I don't think this is that big of a deal, everybody's doing it, it's harmless, things like this, I would strongly challenge you to reconsider. And like I said, you want to reach out to me personally, I'm happy to have an offline conversation. There is plenty of research out there on this. You can do your own digging carefully. Obviously, this is not something you want to just be browsing around digging into. But if you are very keen about this, the data's there. This is not a net neutral that's, oh, well, it just depends on, it's in the hands of, whoever's using it. It can possibly be used for good or bad. And if you think otherwise, I would really challenge you to dig deeper and examine this, because this isn't just a conservative Christian worldview thing. This is serious, and we have the psychological data to prove it. We have a lot of things out there demonstrating that this is not net neutral, and we should be, if anything, this is a move in the wrong direction. This blew out of hand in, with the rage of the internet, with the onset of the internet. We should be pushing this back the other direction, pushing us away. I don't think we can ever eliminate it, but we should be pushing in the other direction, going, what can we do to prevent this kind of use for this technology? Not going, well, let's see how we can use it and we'll just do it ethically. There's not an ethical way that we can do this. If you are someone who is hooked, who is involved with this, I know how shameful and embarrassing that can be. I would encourage you to bring it into the light, get help. We need to talk about this more. I know this is a very taboo subject. Oftentimes people are like, ooh, I don't want to say anything. It's a little awkward. Maybe talk about it behind closed doors, things like that. But we need to bring this into the light. And if you're somebody who's struggling with this, get help now, because I'm telling you, this is going to get a whole lot worse. And if you thought you had control over this, if you thought, well, I've got it under control, it's not that big of a deal, it already is a big deal, and it's rotting you from the inside. But on top of it, it's going to get worse. And whatever control you thought you had, you will not have with this. If you're someone who's involved in this industry, get out. And I know many reasons, and I know many people who have found themselves here. It was not where they imagined themselves. They somehow got brought into it. They brought themselves into it. Sir, I get it. And again, there can be a lot of shame in this, and I understand why people want to keep it in the dark, but bring it into the light. Find people you can trust. Find ways to do it. You can find ways out, and I would encourage you to do just that. At the end of the day, if we're going to use AI in this industry at all, period. Some people go, well, what would you say? What would you have AI do? How would we use AI in a beneficial way? You know what? OpenAI, if you end up listening to this and you want to know how you can use your technology for this, how about use it to analyze and review what's there and make sure that these people are safe. Make sure these are people who haven't been kidnapped, who haven't been taken, who aren't there against their will, that we have records of these things, that we can locate them, that they're okay. Like, there are so many ways we could be using artificial intelligence in a way to battle this back, make it more, I don't even want to say safe, but reduce the harm of this industry, reduce the harm of this stuff, not make it worse. And I feel like that is where we are right now. And seeing that last night, it kept me up for a good portion of the night, because it is very concerning to me that we are already seeing OpenAI jump into this space, because this is a serious, in my opinion, step backwards from where we should be moving. So that was a longer one than I intended. It also was the first one, because I really truly do hope that if you don't share the same concern that I do, that I've at least influenced you to think somewhat differently about it. And that if you are someone who is struggling, wrapped up in this, that you will do something about it, and that you will get help, seek help, get out, because it will destroy you. It will destroy you. And that may sound like an extreme thing coming from me, who tends to be very, I tend to be very nuanced and, see the complexity and all this. And again, I'm not trying to come at this from just some, isolated side, just going, well, just ban all of this. So it's like that's a foolish way to try and approach it. But there are things that we can do and we need to be doing. So with that, I'm going to transition to number 2. Again, not a super, I've got a couple in here that I think are a little higher, positive ones. The next one was also a disappointing one. If you didn't hear about it, UnitedHealthcare was hacked. And there's not a whole lot of details on this yet, because it is still under active investigation. But this one's serious. This one affects up to 1/3 of the US population. When you think about how many millions of people's health data is at risk because of this hack. And if I'm remembering the situation right, it was a ransomware type situation. They have already paid a bunch of money to this. If you don't know much about how ransomware works, it is a very complicated thing that, you don't always know the outcome. And even if you think, you've paid your way out of it, you don't really know what happened to the data. So we still don't know what the impact of this is. So if you are someone who has had interaction with UnitedHealthcare, if you're someone who has UnitedHealthcare, I would encourage you to, keep an eye on this. Something that was interesting digging into, how did we get here? A lot of times when we think about IT security and things like two-factor authentication, or having strong passwords, or not simple things, not leaving your password on a Post-it note on your desk, or making it your spouse's birthday or her, first name, or thing. We think about these things and it's easy to roll your eyes and go, it's so inconvenient, or it's not that big of a deal. Who really cares? It's not a problem until it is. And unfortunately, it takes things like this for people to finally go, oh, snap. What did we do? How could we have prevented this? And honestly, at least the little bit that I've dug into this, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication could have prevented this. It could have at least mitigated, if not completely prevented this. And so as I think about this, there's 2 takeaways that I think anybody watching or listening can take from this. First of all, one, your data is more precious than gold. And so taking it, you wouldn't leave, you wouldn't take all the money out of your bank and put it in a suitcase and leave it sitting outside your front porch and just go, well, I'm sure nobody comes to my house. Nobody's going to take this. You wouldn't do that. But so often we treat our digital security and our digital identity and our data with that kind of disregard, as though, well, it's not that big of a deal. And I think sometimes it's just a lack of digital awareness about how easy it can be once you know the footprint and the web of somebody's digital footprint, how you can quickly get through some of these things. And so I would, first of all, want to encourage people, if you don't take your digital security seriously, if you're not using secure passwords, if you're not using, honestly, I think multi-factor authentication, I hear people all the time go, it's so convenient. Excuse me. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say multi-factor authentication is so convenient. I've heard the argument, multi-factor authentication is so inconvenient. And you know what? Yeah, it can be at times. It can be at times inconvenient to have something confirm with your phone or with a phone call or a text message or some sort of randomized authenticator before you can log in. It adds an extra step, and it can be a pain if your device isn't sitting right next to you and things like this. And so I understand why our human nature is to go, well, I'm just not going to do that because I don't really believe it's that big of a deal. But that'd be like saying, I don't really believe in keeping my money in a bank or putting it in a safe or things like that, because chances are nobody's ever going to do anything with it. Well, yeah, until it does happen. And until all of a sudden you go, oh no, what do I do? Now, again, like I said, I understand, hey, you know what? You may not have control over this UHC health stuff, but the reason you might go, why are you talking about me and my, security when you're talking about UnitedHealthcare and a hack that, what am I supposed to do? Their data, my data might have been hacked because of them. Well, what happens is that data can then be used to hack your stuff. That's the whole reason this kind of stuff happens. This data is hacked so other people can take it and then go try and do other things with it, like get into your bank, like try and have this information that they can get into your email, they can get into these other things. So now let this be a reminder that, first of all, if you are not using baseline security protocols like strong passwords and multi-factor authentication, please take the time. I get it might take you 30 seconds more to get into your apps, or you may get but all it takes is you get the one notification from somebody tried to log in. Was this you? And you go, that wasn't me. And you've saved yourself from that. So believe me, it's worth it, even though it may seem inconvenient. I think something else that I would want to draw attention to with this, especially around healthcare matters, is a lot of people talk and we think about healthcare. We assume our health data is safe because we go, well, it's health data. It's protected by HIPAA. Healthcare companies are responsible for taking the utmost care of that. And what we often don't realize is that HIPAA does not cover consumer health products. And so as we think about wearables, as we think about other devices, places that we're putting our health data, things like that, we can wrongly assume that just because it's health related, it is automatically somehow in this impenetrable, safe, secured from any possible breaches, and it's not. And so what I would say is, first of all, one, do an inventory of where your health data is, because again, your data is extremely precious and it's extremely valuable, and it's especially valuable to somebody who's trying to do nefarious things. So be very mindful of where you're putting your information, where you're putting your health data. Be mindful of the ways you're authenticating and the way you're logging into things. And yes, maybe it's inconvenient, but in the long term, it's well worth it to protect yourself in the event something like this happens. And again, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. I'm curious to see the impact, the magnitude. But like I said, the little bit that I saw about how we got here, some of these things that I just described could have prevented it. From what I know. Now, I don't want to speak to it because I know there's always complexity and there's always nuance to it. But yeah, just again, a call to just really be mindful of this, because especially in the age of AI, where hacking is not something that requires somebody with an advanced degree in software engineering and computer science, can be done very easily by very non-skilled people in the space. And so this is going to continue to be a rising threat. And so I'd encourage you to not just write it off and go, nobody cares. While at the same time, not being paranoid. I think there are some simple measures that you can take that can allow you to be comfortable and free and not sit and worry about this stuff, while at the same time being diligent and vigilant and making sure that you're doing whatever you can. Because at the end of the day, you can't control everything and things are going to happen. But are you doing everything that you can within your control? And that would be my encouragement to people who listen to this one. All right. Transitioning into two big announcements out of the Google sphere this week. And man, I was really impressed with this. If you have not heard of Med-Gemini and AlphaFold 3, all I will say is, wow. I started this episode with kind of a downer on something that I think just has no net positive for society as a whole. Healthcare is one where it is fascinating, and I think there's going to be some tremendous health benefits that come from the advancement of artificial intelligence in the healthcare space. So let me break these two down for you as quickly as I can so that you understand what they are. So you can dig deeper depending on how nerdy you are. If you want to really dig into, the complexity of these different tools, you can, but I want to at least give you a quick overview. So Med-Gemini is, Google Gemini, which I've talked about many times as their Gen AI platform. Med-Gemini is their specially trained version specific for healthcare. So it is specifically trained on this. And one of the things that's a unique differentiator for Google's Med-Gemini compared to GPT's health version of this is it's also incorporating the online sphere, which I'll talk about the risk that brings. But what it does is it opens up the possibilities for how physicians and healthcare providers can diagnose and detect what's going on with people. So when you think about healthcare, if you're a physician, if you haven't been around the healthcare space, but chances are you've been to a doctor, you know that if you have an unusual or sometimes even a common thing, there you get asked a lot of questions. There's a lot of factors that have to be taken into consideration. Sometimes you might not even remember it. You might forget which medications you're on. You might forget about that last doctor's visit that you went for this. You might forget about this condition that you had because you've just kind of learned to live with it. Now, all of that might be in your health records, but you might not remember it. And there's too much data for your physician to remember. It's impossible for them to do all that when you think about the number of patients they're seeing. So as you can imagine, when it comes to you get sick with something weird's going on and you go in to try and get this diagnosed, there's a lot of misses that can happen and there's a lot of misdiagnoses that can happen. And Med-Gemini is designed to help with that significantly, to be able to know the magnitude of what your whole history is, then also be able to take in from the outside all of the possible data out there to say, let's figure out what this might be. Because again, remember, if you're working with a single physician, their expertise is limited to the physicians they've interacted with over the years, their experience over the years, which maybe they may be the most widely versed physician in the world, but it still pales in comparison to how much data is available out there. And when we think about healthcare, how it's all about efficiency and moving as quickly as possible, you can imagine there are a lot of examples where people don't get the quality of care they really deserve because it's just too time consuming. Not everybody can have Dr. House that has a whole team of people dedicated to figuring out what's wrong with them, making sure they get it right, experimenting with all the possibilities, and then saving you in 50 minutes type of a thing. That's just not reality. That's not how healthcare works. Med-Gemini is designed to get us even closer to that, where we can actually use AI to be able to scour all of this information, identify the patterns, and be able to quickly assist and figure out, hey, how do we do this? Now, three things that I'll address with this, and then I'll describe AlphaFold. Three things I think we got to be careful of as we go down this. Because like I said, this is one I'm extremely excited about. I think this is fantastic. I look forward to where this is going and some of the ways this is going to improve health outcomes in the future. Some of the concerns I have around Med-Gemini and these kinds of specially trained healthcare things. So first of all, one is obviously there is the potential risk, and I know because I work with a lot of physicians over the years, the concern that won't this take away jobs from physicians? I think that one I can relatively quickly put to bed in that it may change their jobs. It absolutely probably should and will, but I don't see it eliminating the need for physicians or healthcare professionals. Because if you really think about it, at the end of the day, I told you before, there's just so much time and energy and effort that goes into this. It's impossible for a doctor or physician every single time to go in and do this deep research for every patient they have, try and do it. So as a result, a lot of times assumptions are made, best practices are assumed, things like that. MedGemini closes that gap so you actually can improve quality of care. Now, granted, there's a decision that has to be made on the healthcare level to say, well, rather than just jamming more patients through the system, how do we improve quality of care? And so I think to the healthcare leaders that listen to this, I would encourage you to focus on, hey, let's think about this technology in terms of improving quality of care versus just how do we jam more patients through the pipeline? And you know what? Maybe it's both. I think there's a world where you might be able to raise the tide on both of those. But I think to the physicians and the healthcare professionals, where it's going to shift your job focus is rather than maybe being the person that specializes in knowing all the things, which quite frankly, generative AI is better at knowing all the things because it just has access to more stuff and can process this stuff billions of times faster than you can. You can focus on the patient interaction. And so my encouragement to healthcare providers is so many of the healthcare providers I know got into healthcare because they care deeply about patients. One of the barriers to actually being able to care about patients is the busy work that's often associated with healthcare. So this truly has the opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I don't need to do quite as much of this. And man, the accuracy of this Med-Gemini is impressive. Now, granted, I think going back to humans in the loop, do you still want a physician there to think critically, to analyze, to make sure that they're making the best judgment and decision on this? Yeah. Do you still want the physician there to be with the patient? Because there's nothing worse than being in a doctor's office and you're getting bad news and you don't want that delivered to you by a Gen AI bot. You want that delivered to somebody who can talk you through this and say, you know what, I've worked with patients. I've seen this through. I've been in the healthcare space long enough to know that in those hard times, what people need is another human being to be there for them and support them through that and help them understand, what does this mean? What could I be doing? And they need somebody who can empathize and emotionally connect with them on a personal level, which so many healthcare people I know, that's what they really love and want to do. So if you're a healthcare person listening to this going, I'm afraid of what Med-Gemini can do, I hope it actually encourages you to go, wow, I might actually get to spend more of my time on this and deliver a better quality of care. I think the other thing that is a bit of a concern for me related to this is who the audience will be for this. In some ways, I think it's fantastic that the general population and the general public is able to do a little bit more of their own, I hate this term, but do a little bit more of their own research when it comes to their health stuff. I also see how that doesn't always go well. And I've known many healthcare providers who are frustrated by people who, because they already believe they know what's wrong with them, won't listen to professionals who've spent their whole careers in this going, I know that you think that I'm telling you this is not it. And so I think there is some risk if this starts to democratize to the fact where just anybody can do it. But at the same time, I see the benefit. Going back to what my first point, normally I see both sides of things when I really truly believe there are two sides to this. So I think we have to tread carefully when it comes to how quickly do we go down to consumer access, things like that. Again, this is still in testing phase. This isn't out on the market. You can't just go to med.gemini.com and start typing in your symptoms and get an accurate diagnosis. But I was thoroughly impressed with what this thing was able to do. It was really impressive with its accuracy, its ability to scour massive amounts of data and ask really important questions to get to this. I think one of the other concerns that I have with Gemini, again, it's this mixed bag, because one of the reasons I think it's blowing the other ones out there competing with it out of the water is they made the decision to give it access to the open internet, which gives it more access to more information. But for anybody who's followed me for any length of time, we're moving into the age of distrust where what's on the internet can't always be trusted. In fact, I would encourage everyone to have a healthy dose of skepticism about that article you read on Facebook or that thing that showed up in your news feed that, is convincing you that this is the path that we need to go. So I think there's just going to have to be some clear guidance and regulation around how that's managed to ensure that, we're careful of what it looks like to add access to that to the open web. But again, huge breakthrough and advancement in the healthcare space. Let's shift over to AlphaFold 3. This one was really interesting. This was another one that I guess was the upside to some of the news I was going through last night, was AlphaFold 3, which now has demonstrated with shocking accuracy its ability to predict the protein structures and interactions of all of life's molecules. Now, if that made you go, what does that actually mean? In short, if you look at what this thing has been able to do, it's able to actually break down the molecular structures of basically anything, like literally anything, and then also predict what the molecular structure would be of something that maybe it hasn't even been trained on. So based on what it knows, it can then create these 3D models that show the molecular structure of everything. Now, the other part that's really fascinating about this is it's also able to predict how it would interact with other things. Now, if you are listening to this going, okay, neat. What I think, honestly, even in looking at the news articles and some of the comments on some of the stuff that I read, I think people are grossly underestimating what a huge breakthrough this is in healthcare. Because what this now allows us to do, if you have not been around the healthcare space, you may not understand how much time and work goes into determining, just let's use medicine as an example. If we create this compound, what happens when we try and use it on this? And what does it do to it? How will it interact? How will it change the molecular structure? What kind of impact will it have? You think about, first of all the research that has to go into even trying to make a prediction on this, years, months, sometimes years, just trying to come up with our predictions on that. Then to have to test and to do all this stuff because you really don't know, then just adds to the lifeline of this. This is where when I worked in pharma and people would go, I really wish we would get, medicines out to the market faster. When you really understand the complexity of it, it's not surprising how long it takes and where we may actually have treatments to things. And that's where when people say like, oh, these companies are just withholding treatments. It's like, they may even have the treatment to something, but because of how long it takes to go through the process to make sure, is it actually safe? Are the outcomes that it produces better than any potential side effects? I mean, it's massive. So for AI to be able to predict this stuff, model this stuff, then actually accurately say, if we do this, what implications does it have that we need to take into consideration? You can start to, at least I can, and hopefully me explaining this is helping you see, we can start to look at, wait a minute, so we could potentially identify, viruses or cancers or things like that, and then be able to say, what if we did this? Or what kind of molecular structure would we need to use to combat this? How do we do it safely? You can just begin to start to imagine the possibilities of what we're doing. And when I dug into some of these things that used to take months, potentially years, we're talking hours, maybe days. So exponential timeline crunch of this stuff with accuracy that was shocking, to say the least. Now, granted, like everything I say with AI, is it some silver bullet that's going to magically, predict the cure to cancer in the next 2 to 3 years? I don't know. Maybe it will. But I think we have to tread carefully because, like so many of these things, if you listen to last week, one of the things I talked about was we don't always know if it's right until kind of like the hacking thing. You don't know if it's wrong until it's wrong. And when it's wrong, you go, oops, this was serious. Or you go, hey, it did something that was really good, but ooh, the side effects of what it did actually grossly outweigh it. Now, granted, We can't completely eliminate that, but what this does is it actually allows us to expedite the process and experiment with this, which can then get us to a point of bringing this to animal and human trials quicker with things, diagnosing diseases, being able to treat different things. This is a huge, huge, huge advancement for the medical, chemical world in being able to figure out, how do we actually work with compounds and what can they do? So I was really excited. These were two highlights for me this week that I was really encouraged by, where I go, all right, you want to talk about things I'm excited about AI being able to do and some of the ways that I see it being a net positive for us as a society. These two were ones that, digging into them, seeing what they can do, learning more about how accurate they are and how much they can actually speed this stuff up. While at the same time, if used right, we don't need to see it as a threat to us. It's actually an augmentation. And actually, that is some of the best use that's already coming out in the early testing of this. So again, super encouraged by this one. Again, I think it's a highlight in what so far in the episode has been a bit of a more grim focus on things. All right. Final topic. I know I'm long on this one today, but I knew that first one was going to take me a little bit longer than usual. So there was a recent report that came out. I've read about it on a couple different things. I think it was Wall Street Journal. I saw it on Inc. I saw it on a couple other different things. There was a sizable survey that was done on employee satisfaction. They surveyed 1,700 people to say, how satisfied are you with your job, or happy or satisfied, something like that. Anyway, the results came back and it was 62.7%, which, according to the company that did this, or the group that did this study, that's the highest it's been since 1987 when the survey first came out. Granted, it's only up 0.4 from last year. So on the surface, this is good news. So if you're somebody who's been, listening to stuff, there's a lot of just grim, dark news out there, and you'll hear things like, oh, engagement is 30% or things like that. This seems to give a slightly better picture for how things are going, that people in general are satisfied with their jobs. However, and here's my big however on this one, before you pop the champagne or sparkling juice, whatever is your preference on this, and go celebrate, there's more to the story than just, hey, huzzah, 63% of people are satisfied with their job. Satisfied is a very complicated topic. And when you actually dug further into the data, it was really interesting. And I didn't take the time to sit and do all the math because it was actually confusing to me how this ended up as higher than last year, when actually across the 26 different measures that they measure to determine overall satisfaction. So obviously you've got satisfaction at the highest level, and that's made up of a number of different categories. So over the 26 measures, it actually dropped in all 26 of them. So somehow the overall rating was up, but the categories independently were all down. So we'll probably go back and take a closer look at this. But so again, more to the story, that first of all, one, don't think everything's great, everything's wonderful, everybody's fine. Because even still, 63%, that still means 37% of people are dissatisfied with their jobs, which you got to factor in. Some folks are never happy, so you take that out of the mix. There's still a sizable group of people who could be satisfied with their work that aren't. So I think for companies, it shows that there's still room to improve. One of the things that was interesting about this data was one of the areas in terms of priorities that was really interesting. So compensation, wages, actually dropped in terms of priorities for people. So they were more satisfied with wages. One of the areas that rose up as like contributing factors for not being satisfied was the quality of leadership and the organizational culture. So to the senior leaders, to any leader, honestly, to just anybody in the workforce out there, how you show up at work, the way you lead your organization, the culture you create, this is a huge factor. Now, even, at least according to this survey, it's more important than how much you're paying people. Now, granted, I would say that's a more complicated equation than just, oh, hey, you don't pay people and just make sure you have a great culture. That doesn't work either. Going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how that stuff works. But I think the bottom line is, for leaders, one, there's room to grow. Two, how you show up and the culture you create in your teams and in your organization matters significantly. Some of the other things that were a little bit interesting, well, actually a lot bit interesting, and looking at some of the nuance and the breakdown of the numbers, uh, men were typically more satisfied than women were with their jobs. So I think that continues to show that there is still disparity between genders. I am not one to just stereotype. And so, I hate when people just go, oh, so men are happier at work than women. Like, well, okay, maybe as a general trend, which I think again goes back to leaning into some of these, where is this breaking down? Not everything is hunky dory. And how, as leaders, are we leaning in to understand where that disparity is and what we can do about it? Well, at the same time, not making assumptions. And, as an example, you wouldn't want to just go, well, the dudes are all happy, so who cares I won't pay attention to them. I'll just focus on making sure the females are happy. And then going, what? Like that, you can't. So don't do that kind of poor leadership behavior type stuff. It's not helpful. But it was interesting in that. Another interesting thing that stood out was fully in-office workers were less satisfied with their jobs than remote workers. But the most engaged out of the three or satisfied was hybrid workers. So one of the things I thought that was interesting about that, and granted, remote and hybrid was almost statistically insignificant, so I wouldn't stand on a soapbox and say that this is concrete evidence of this. But I think what it does show, which confirms, I don't know how many other countless research reports that I read, it does show that flexibility, personalization, things like that matter a lot to people. And so to leaders, I would say, hey, if you're thinking I'm just going to make people fit into my box and they're just going to have to deal with it, it's absolutely a surefire way to make sure your employees aren't as satisfied as they could be. Now, the other thing I would say to people who may see this data and kind of want to kick back on your laurels, granted, I don't think very many of the people who anybody who would listen to my content for any length of time, to my knowledge, would not be somebody who would do that. But if you are someone who's kind of going, oh, perfect, things are good, we're fine, I would say satisfaction as a measure of overall organizational health can be a bit of a dangerous one, because people are satisfied until they're not. And if you're banking on their satisfaction as your measure of organizational health or cultural health, that's a very vulnerable statistic. So that's just one thing I would say is, even for those who may be wanting to pulse or learn more from their employees about how they're doing, things like that, I would caution people to be careful about how much you lean into, like, well, are you happy with your job? I mean, depending on the day and time of day, you sent me a survey to ask me if I'm happy with my job, I'm going to answer that question very differently. So for anybody who's looking at getting into this, I would encourage you to find regular touch points, ways to do this, and spend time getting to know your people. Don't just read reports like this and go, oh, this is the current state of things. But one thing that I thought was encouraging, to end on an encouraging note, is there is no shortage of, apocalyptic, dystopian content out there telling us everyone's miserable, everybody's unhappy, everything's awful. And this to me was an indicator that, goes back to my conversation with Bill Connerly last week on, the average person, if you talk to them and just focus just on their day-to-day, the average person, the majority of people overall, hey, you know what? My everyday life is pretty good. I'm enjoying things. Things are all right. I don't feel that awful. It's this other stuff that gets us all amped up that, yeah, some of them, it should get us amped up. But then there's other times where it's like, we probably just need to calm down a little bit. So with that, I am well over on time. Hopefully this was helpful and you enjoyed kind of catching up on these, and hopefully it's made you think. Hopefully, especially on that first one, if you weren't on the same page as me, I have influenced you to think differently, because there are some serious risks. And while I'm extremely excited about where some things in AI are going and where technology is advancing, there are other ones that I just universally am not happy about, and will continue battling back with whatever power that I have. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Well, whenever you listen to this, a wonderful rest of your day, wonderful week, wonderful month, whatever. And I will see you on the other side.